أحد الجنرالات الأمريكيين الجدل بتعليقه على خطة الرئيس السابق دونالد ترامب، مشيراً إلى أنها كشفت عن نفاق العالم العربي في التعامل مع القضايا الاستراتيجية، وأوضح أن بعض الدول العربية التي نددت بالخطة علناً كانت في الواقع منخرطة في تفاهمات سرية حولها، فهل كانت هذه الخطة مجرد خدعات تفاوضية لكشف المواقف الحقيقية؟ كيف رد جينرال امريكي على خطة ترامب؟ لكن قبل مشاهدة الفيديو متابعينا أتمنى منكم الاشتراك في القناة وتفعيل زر الإشعارات.
Israelis don't want that. People who live in Gaza certainly don't want that. That's not really possible. I think what Trump's announcement did, again, whether he intended it this way or not, what it's really done is expose this massive hypocrisy in the Arab world, which is showing that nobody in the Arab world wants to take responsibility. They want to claim like they care for Gazans. They want to claim like they support this Palestinian state, but they don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to take any refugees. They don't want to take any ownership of it. They don't want to put the funds toward it that would be necessary. So when President Trump comes in there and says, "Fine, we'll do it," everybody freaks out. Everyone's like, "No, we absolutely don't want that." Well, then guess what? Now there's an off-ramp. Now there's a place for you to come in since we've exposed that hypocrisy. So look, this is pretty typical unorthodox Trump policy being thrown out there, but it could end up exactly where it should end up, which is the Arab world has to take responsibility for this.
Well, I understand the point you make about this being maybe a negotiating gambit as well as the hypocrisy of the leaders of Arab countries, but Mr. Trump is not saying, President Trump is not saying, we will form this Riviera of the Middle East for the Palestinian people. He's saying the Palestinian people will leave and will form this for the people of the world, I think he said. And that's quite a significant difference.
Yeah, I think the White House is, I'm trying to keep track of the White House statements just like you are, and from what I understand, I mean, they've walked that back pretty significantly. There's not going to be anybody forced to leave. There's not going to be any U.S. troops on the ground. I think it's look, there's precedent for this, by the way. In the last administration, President Trump announced an idea for like a $52 million Riviera of the Middle East. Again, it's using the same language wherein Hamas demilitarizes and infrastructure and development comes in. This isn't that different from that proposal. It's just that it's coming on the heels of a very hot war. And so again, what really needs to happen here is that Arab states, if they're going to say no to everything, well then they actually have to show up to the table and take some responsibility. And I think that's going to be the end game that we're looking for here.
So, but you would agree with the idea that the Palestinian people either voluntarily being expelled or whatever that means, or forcibly expelled, like this land is for the Palestinian people, right? I mean,
yeah, well, like I'm not moving there. I don't think you want to move there. So Israelis don't want to move there. Nobody wants to move there. And also, Jordan, Egypt, they don't want to take any resettlement. They don't want to take anyone from Gaza. They've been pretty clear about that. So look, this isn't that. While I think the headlines and there's a lot of chaos right now in how this is being messaged, this isn't that different from past proposals when it's all said and done.
Anderson, you got at the core problem here, which is there is no plan. Usually when you hear a president announce something like this, and he was reading from some papers, so clearly he had thought this out. It wasn't just something that he blurted out when he was standing there with Prime Minister Netanyahu. There were no meetings. There was no discussion with the Pentagon, with the State Department, with anybody who might talk about whether the Palestinians would be interested in going along with this plan. There was no discussion of whether or not the Palestinians would agree to leave to go to Jordan or in Egypt. There was no discussion of whether Egypt and Jordan would take them. So what you are left with is the president talking about this. It got, everybody immediately piled on for why it wouldn't work. His own Secretary of State backed away a little bit, said this would only be temporary, said the Palestinians would return, although the president said everybody would return to this region, right? And then the president turns out this tweet to sort of double down because I think he was somewhat embarrassed. My bet is that he will keep repeating this, but the idea will probably just fade away.
What do you expect to happen next, Stephen? Just how realistic is this plan?
Well, the fact that the president kept talking about it yesterday does suggest it's serious, but I think we need to look to see if there are any policy movements here towards this goal. King Abdullah of Jordan is due in Washington in the coming weeks, and presumably we'll see other Middle Eastern leaders. Is the president going to publicly push for this plan when they're in town? Is this, in fact, a big opening bet, typical of Trump, where he takes a huge position in the hope that he can get a deal that falls somewhat short of his original stake? That's a possibility. One thing that this does show, and in Trump's own indomitable way, he's pointing it out, is that there is no real discussion of what happens to Gaza when the war with Hamas is over, not just in the United States, but in Israel and around the region. If this can galvanize that, I suppose there could be some forward movement that comes out of it. But I think most starkly, this is an indication of a president who won re-election, has defeated the legal clouds over him, escaped an assassination attempt, and wants to make big moves. And he feels that there are no barriers, whether they're posed by reality, the Constitution, or international law, for him to do what he wants. This is the kind of idea that in his first term, I think he would have been talked out of talking about by what were then seen as adults in the room in the administration. There's no one in that White House now who will talk Trump down and say, look, this is not a smart thing to talk about in public. So, that is the character of the administration that we now have in Trump's second term.
Heavy rain and wind wreak havoc on parts of Gaza already decimated by Israeli airstrikes. People living in tents where their homes once stood tried to pick up the pieces.
ومسكنا طول الليل مسكين الخشبيكة وواقفين بعدين طيرتنا احنا والخشب وطارت الخيمة ما شفناش أثارها الليل متنا من السقعة جمدنا ايش عنا ايش الدنيا بدنا حاجة تساعدونا فيها أي حاجة خيم مصاري نروح ما معناش حق السيارة نروح فيها.
Authorities in Gaza are urgently seeking aid, including rescue equipment and tens of thousands of tents.
معيش مسار اروح وداري رايح وانا اروح صرنا حيوانات احنا ايه والله العظيم الحيوان عايش احسن منا مش قادرين نتحمل بظلش سنة ونص احنا في العذاب وفي القصف وفي الخبط وفي الاخر هيك يصير فينا.
CNN has reached out to Israeli authorities regarding access to shelter and rescue equipment in Gaza.